There is a tooth inside this dinosaur's face. It snapped off in there, and the bone closed around nothing. 15 centimeters of enamel broken clean. They put the skull through a CT scanner to see how it was sitting. The tooth points forward, which means whatever left it there was not trailing this animal and was not picking at something already lying on the ground. It was standing in front of it, face to face. And that matters more than it sounds, because Tyrannosaurus rex could not run. Not slowly at all. Model the skeleton at a running gait, and the loads snap its own legs underneath it. For 20 years that was the strongest argument anyone had, that this animal never hunted anything at all. It hunted, we can prove it. This is Lost Continent, and today we're looking at what actually happened when Tyrannosaurus killed. Stay to the end, because the man who spent 20 years arguing it was a scavenger was right about one thing, and that one thing explains everything. Start with what was at stake, because this was never a small disagreement about table manners at the end of the Cretaceous. A predator and a scavenger are different animals. They move differently, they see differently, they evolve under completely different pressures. Get it wrong and you've misunderstood every other animal in that ecosystem, because you've misunderstood what they were running from. For most of the 20th century, nobody asked. Tyrannosaurus was the killer, obviously closed. Then, in the 1990s, one of the most influential paleontologists alive stood up and said the obvious answer was wrong. Jack Horner, the man who advised Jurassic Park, who found the first dinosaur eggs in the Western Hemisphere. And he didn't build the argument out of nothing. He built it out of the animal's own anatomy, piece by piece, and it took 2 decades and 2 extraordinary fossils to answer him. His case had 5 parts, every one of them pointed at the same animal, a specialist in finding things that were already dead. The arms, barely a meter long on an animal approaching 9 tons, useless for holding down anything that fought back. Second, the olfactory lobe, that's the part of the brain that processes smell, and in Tyrannosaurus it is genuinely enormous. Vultures have the same arrangement, and for a reason. Smell carries for kilometers. A carcass announces itself long before anything can see it. Third, the eyes, small for the skull, Horner argued, and small eyes are poor equipment for tracking live prey across open ground. Fourth, the teeth, not blades for slicing flesh, thick, deep-rooted cones shaped to crush and to hold. And fifth, the size, being enormous, is precisely how you take a carcass away from everything else that got there first. Put those 5 together and you get a coherent animal. That coherence is exactly what made the argument so hard to wave away. Then there was a 6th piece. And it's the one that mattered most in the end. Tyrannosaurus could not run. We'll come back to that. So how do you answer him? Not with an opinion about anatomy. With a body that was bitten and survived. In 2013, a team led by Robert De Palma published something small and completely decisive in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. 2-tail vertebrae from a hadrosaur, out of the Hell Creek Formation in South Dakota. Wedged between them, still sitting exactly where it landed 66 million years ago, was the broken crown of a Tyrannosaurus tooth. Now, a tooth in a bone proves contact and nothing more. A scavenger biting into a corpse leaves the same mark, and we should be honest about that. Which is where this particular fossil stops being ordinary. Bone had grown over the wound. It grew around the tooth, sealed it inside, and fused the 2 vertebrae into a single solid piece. Healing takes time, and time requires a heartbeat. The estimates for that much new bone run to years, not weeks. So the sequence isn't in question. Something closed its jaws on the base of this animal's tail, and then it lost. The hadrosaur tore itself free with a tooth still buried in its spine. You cannot fail to kill something that is already dead. That settles whether it hunted. It says almost nothing about how, and a bite at the tail is a bite at something already running away. Which brings us to a specimen catalogued as MOR 1627, held at the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, Montana. It's the skull of an Edmontosaurus, and the study describing it went into the journal Peerj in February of this year, by Thea Weinberg-Hensler and John Scanella. There are somewhere around 23 bite marks across it, not a single strike, a sustained, repeated attack on an animal's head. And embedded in the nasal bone at the front of the face, a broken Tyrannosaurus tooth. As Weinberg Hensler puts it, the force required to snap a tooth off inside solid bone points to the use of deadly force. And here the researchers do something worth crediting. They stop. There is no healed bone anywhere on this skull. In Scanella's words, it may already have been dead when it was bitten, or it may be dead because it was bit. Alone, this one proves nothing. But set it beside that tale from 2013 and go back to the one argument from the scavenger camp that nobody could ever knock down. In 2017, a team led by William Sellers modeled the skeleton under the mechanical loads that running would actually generate, and the finding wasn't that Tyrannosaurus ran slowly. It was that running would have broken its own legs underneath it. So the scavenger camp was right about the legs, and wrong about what the legs meant. That distinction is this entire story. An animal that cannot pursue is not forced to be a scavenger. It is forced to be an ambusher, and those are not remotely the same thing. And once you see it that way, the rest of Horner's list stops working as evidence for eating the dead at all. The eyes were never small. Kent Stevens measured a binocular field of 55 degrees wider than a hawk's, with acuity that may have run to many times our own. That is not the equipment of an animal scanning a horizon for corpses. That is range finding, and range finding exists for one purpose: to close a gap. The bite was measured by Gignac and Erickson at up to 34,000 newtons, at pressures high enough to shatter bone outright. Close one short distance once. Take the head. Sometimes that worked and we have the face of an Edmontosaurus to prove it. Sometimes it failed and we have the tail that got away. And yes, it ate carrion too, because every large predator alive today does. There was never anything strange about that part. And the argument did what a good argument does. It forced the field to stop assuming and go and find the bones that could settle it. Without it, nobody goes looking. Follow the expedition, because in that same rock at that same moment, a second tyrannosaur was hunting alongside this one, and for 40 years they insisted it wasn't real.